and welcome to Capital Account. I'm Lauren Lister here in Washington, D.C. These are your headlines for March 30th, 2012. We have heard billionaire investor Warren Buffett make this case about taxes in the U.S.
We certainly shouldn't raise taxes on anybody except the very rich. I think we should raise taxes on the very rich.
But when you look at the facts, is this really about Buffett wanting to be taxed more, or is this about crony capitalism and his place in the pecking order? We'll talk about what we can learn from it, what it symbolizes, and who this may affect. Meanwhile, the Eurozone has boosted its rescue funds. Finance ministers agreed to increase their fiscal bailout system by 40% to 700 billion euro. We ask if there's a way to benefit from reading the follies of central planners. Is Ben Bernanke, for example, a contrarian indicator? We'll discuss. Meanwhile, this week, new Case-Shiller numbers told us U.S. housing not so good, at least in the sense that average home price dropped back to levels last seen in 2003. But is housing actually way worse? And could that be a good thing? Let's get to today's Capital Account. So we've heard billionaire investor Warren Buffett saying the rich should be taxed more, that he should be taxed more. He's made the case very publicly and with much fanfare that he pays 17%, a little more than that in taxes, a lower tax rate than his secretary, and not only that.
There wasn't anybody in the office, from the receptionist on up, that paid as low a tax rate. And I have no tax planning. I don't have an accountant. I don't have tax shelters. I just follow what the U.S. Congress tells me to do.
Sounds impressive, sounds noble. That message has really traveled. But our guest today asks if we should slap a warning label on each one of Buffett's public pronouncements as well. Before we get into the matter at hand, the one that's so gripping right now, let's look back at a little history, okay? Back in 2003, for example, Buffett was warning about the value of the dollar, the nation's debt, what he said was the U.S. exporting its net worth abroad. He wrote an article warning, in fact, that America's growing trade deficit is selling the nation out from under us. He made his point with a story of the islands of Squanderville and Thriftville. Not hard to figure out which one was the U.S. if you don't remember this piece. And he wrote that sooner or later, the Squanderville government, facing ever greater payments to service debt, would decide to embrace highly inflationary policies, that is, issue more squander bucks to dilute the value of each. Big warning there. But fast forward to the 2008 financial crisis, and Buffett was not worrying about the debt increasing bailouts of the financial system. He was, in fact, advocating for them. Here he is pushing TARP, okay, the Treasury's plan, which Hank Paulson was pushing. This was before it was passed by Congress and signed into law by Bush, but after it had failed in the House the first time. Warren seemed a little flustered during those free market hours. Take a listen.
They hate this term in Washington, obviously, but I would hand something pretty close to a blank check to a fellow like Hank Paulson.
Would you
to
really?
find, yeah, well,
a blank check? $700 billion, go spend it.
Yeah, go invest it.
Right.
And listen to him talking about what made him think this plan would work.
I don't think you could have a better Secretary of the Treasury than Hank Paulson. You know, I mean, he is in there at the wrong time. He probably shouldn't have taken the job. He's a friend of mine.
They're all just buddies. Now, not only that, everything you just heard there, but what also happened before TARP was passed? Buffett invested $5 billion to save Goldman Sachs. Okay, that was announced in September of 2008. And then he's out there advocating a bailout for the banks after it fails the first time, a bailout of banks he now has a stake in, and it was more than just Goldman Sachs, after warning about devaluing the dollar and racking up deficits. Okay. So now we have some context. Now let's talk about what Warren Buffett may really be trying to achieve with his public proclamations about who should pay higher taxes, and more importantly, probably, how this symbolizes the direction that capitalism in the U.S. has taken, where we are today. To help us put all these pieces together, Eric Fry is here. He's editor of the Daily Reckoning. He joins us in L.A., and he has been writing about this. So first, Eric, thanks so much for being on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Lauren.
Likewise for me, it's always nice to talk to you. Now, Buffett is, of course, an example of someone who really epitomizes where we are in what you call not only a crony capitalism phase in the U.S., but a post-capitalism phase in the U.S. So before we get into all of that, let's build this case for Buffett, because you've done a pretty good job, okay? Because Buffett has really become the poster boy for taxing the rich, for paying his fair share along with his rich friends. But let's look at how what he has advocated for would actually affect him when it comes to paying higher personal taxes, because you argue that it wouldn't really. So how so?
No, it would make very little impact, because he advocates for the very taxes that he himself doesn't pay, or that he pays a very small portion of. So if you look at the 2010 tax year, he made roughly $40 million in direct personal income. But his share of Berkshire's after-tax income was about $3 billion. So he's not paying personal tax on that $3 billion, he's paying personal tax on the $40 million. And he wants to raise taxes on the personal income, and he wants to raise taxes on dividends, which Berkshire doesn't pay, and he wants to raise taxes on capital gains, which he himself is not paying because he's not selling any shares of Berkshire Hathaway. So it'd be a little bit like me sitting here saying, hey, you know, here's an idea for tax fairness. Let's tax things that rich people use. Let's tax golf clubs, yachts, you know, and Ferraris. Okay, well, great. I don't play golf, I don't have a yacht, and I don't have a Ferrari, so it doesn't affect me whatsoever. Buffett is in the same role. If he wanted to really advocate some kind of tax fairness, he would advocate the kinds of taxes that you know, would affect him. Things like estate tax, things like minimizing deductions for charitable contributions and that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of any of that. I'm just saying that, you know, to go out and say, hey, let's put these taxes on certain people, taxes I'm not paying, is disingenuous.
Yeah, and let's build this one step further, too, because you mentioned those exclusions, and this is a guy who's been out saying, hey, no, that tax deduction for corporate jets is important. You should not touch that. You also give a good example of how really there is evidence that he doesn't want to pay more taxes, or else why would he have kind of stipulations on money, such as the money he's given to the Gates Foundation? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right, and when he gifted billions of dollars to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2006, this is a series of gifts. And one of the stipulations was that the foundation maintain its tax-free status, so that nothing that he gives to that foundation could ever be taxed. You know, nothing wrong with that. No one wants to pay taxes, and so it's not really a matter of, well, you know, gee, you know, Warren's crazy to say this stuff. The thing that's troubling about it is that is the manner in which it is, in which he presents it.
Yeah.
You know, after he's already accumulated billions of dollars, there's this shucks, gee whiz, golly gosh, I wish I had thought of this earlier. You know, if I thought of it when I was 50, I could have paid billions of dollars, and I could have told my rich friends to pay billions of dollars. And darn it, you know, I just didn't think of it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. It's dishonest.
Yeah, quite a smart guy to all of a sudden realize this. I just want to throw it for our viewers to see the difference between what gets taxed in his personal income and what percentage of his income is from Berkshire Hathaway. If we could throw that up for our viewers while we're talking, Eric, so that they can really say what tax fairness Buffett style is, the way that you've pointed it out. So now the question becomes, we built this great case showing how really Buffett doesn't want to be taxed more, and for all of those reasons you gave. So then the question, Eric, why has he become the crusader of this cause? What's in it for him?
Well, I think he is correctly understanding that the game has changed a bit in the United States, that it is more important for somebody with his capital, with somebody with the investments that he has, to be what's called a political entrepreneur as opposed to a traditional investor. It's more important to cultivate connections with political power than it is to identify the next winning opportunity. And you can see it, the evidence speaks for itself. Look at the kinds of investments that Buffett made early in his career versus the investments that he made most recently. And when he made investments in Goldman Sachs and GE that were literally on the fly. I mean, no due diligence. And I know firsthand we looked at these balance sheets, these banks in 07 and 08. They were extremely opaque. They were extremely leveraged. There was no way to know what was actually inside of a Goldman Sachs balance sheet or a Lehman Brothers balance sheet or a Bear Stearns balance sheet. What you knew is that they were heavily leveraged and that they were leveraged to assets that were what are called level 2, level 3, opaque, not priced in any normal way. And so for a guy like Buffett to just stroll in there and drop down $5 billion, that's not investing. That's gaming it. He stepped in.
Yeah. So are you saying he was making a bet on crony capitalism? He was betting that Hank Paulson at the Treasury would be able to bail out his buddies at Goldman Sachs, for example.
Well, the $5 billion, I remember when he made that investment, my reaction to it was, okay, we're in a kind of free fall already. People know he knows that people follow what he does. And he knew that the press that would follow would be, Warren Buffett thinks these stocks are cheap enough, I'm going to step in and buy them. At the time, if you remember, Berkshire Hathaway was not only long or owning tons and tons of financial stocks that were in free fall, but he also was short put options on emerging market indices, meaning that as these markets fell, he was losing lots and lots of money on a mark-to-market basis. Berkshire, I think, was in a not comfortable spot. So the whole idea behind tossing money into Goldman Sachs was basically a signal that he thinks it's okay, but also that he knew that Hank Paulson would have his back, and that other members of Congress who also happen to own Berkshire Hathaway, shock, shock, would also have his back.
And so you're saying that, for example, when we saw all of this aid that poured into these banks that Berkshire Hathaway had a stake in, to the tune of a lot of federal aid versus in TARP and in federal loan, or the Federal Reserve's kind of loan facilities, all these different things. We can bring up, for example, how crony capitalism impacted Wells Fargo with all that money going in. You're saying, hey, that's not a coincidence. That's where we are today in capitalism.
That's exactly correct. That Warren Buffett had a direct role in shaping policy, both in conversations with the House leadership in 08 and with Hank Paulson directly, and later with President Obama and Timothy Geithner. He has had a direct role in shaping policies that funneled billions of dollars to his companies. Would I have done the same thing in his position? Probably. I don't know. I mean, this isn't about who's more moral or who's less moral, who's more of a hypocrite. I mean, you never know what you will do if you're in that same position.
Yeah.
If you're Imelda Marcos, you're going to have 10,000 shoes. You're going to have 20. You don't know until you're her.
Okay.
So with Buffett, it's kind of the same thing. We don't know what we would do in his position. But it is illustrative that this capitalist is now spending his time, again, currying favor and trying to make sure that the policy favors his companies.
Right, as opposed to just doing due diligence and investing the old-fashioned way. So the question becomes, where does that leave the rest of us? And I want you to help us try and answer that after the break. We're going to go to break shortly, but when we come back, we will have more with Eric Fry, editor of The Daily Reckoning, and still ahead, you commented, now we'll respond. We'll get to viewer feedback ahead, but first, your closing market numbers.